The letter landed on my counter like a brick-white envelope shiny seal, the kind of official that makes your stomach drop before you've even touched it. I'd just poured a second cup of coffee and was thinking about fence repairs when I saw the return address, Silver Mesa Estates Association. I tore it open, thinking it was another nasty gram about paint samples, and stared at the words, Final Notice. Fine. $250,000. Foreclosure threatened if unpaid. For a second, the room leaned coffee turned bitter, and then something steadied in me I didn't know I had. They said my corrals were unsightly, my barn out of pallet, the horses grazing too near a shared vista. They called my fence a visual obstruction to community harmony. I've lived on this ranch since my dad passed it to me, 40 acres, tucked under a ridge line with a wind that sings at dusk, and soil I can read like a face. Harmony to me is that wind. But to them, harmony is beige. So I grabbed my jacket dust on the cuffs and drove to their glass box of an office, 2 stories of polished concrete and clipped hedges, all very impressive if you like buildings that look like they'd shush you. The receptionist tried to smile without moving her lips. I said I'm here for Brent Halverson. Brent is the kind of HOA president who corrects you when you say rules instead of bylaws. He came out with his tie already smirking. Mara Collins, he said, like he'd been practicing my name in the mirror. You got our notice. I laid the letter flat on his desk as if we could both see better that way. You're finding me $250,000 because my barn is red. Among other items, he said. You've accumulated long-standing violations. The board has a duty to preserve architectural integrity. Integrity, I repeated, like threatening to take a woman's home over a paint swatch. He put the phone between us, calm, theatrical, and said, If you can't comply, we escalate. He dialed. I watched his fingers, watched the light blink, heard him use words like trespass, non-compliance, and ongoing risk. The receptionist's eyes hovered at the doorway, curious as a small bird. I don't remember deciding to look. I just did. A leather binder on the credenza, labeled with those gold letters that try too hard, property deeds and titles. I flipped it open, and there it was, the old survey plat I grew up knowing by heart. My father used to lay it across the kitchen table with elbows on the corners to keep it flat. The subdivision map was drawn right over the top, a translucent ghost. The roads, the pocket parks, even this office. All of it sat on easements cut from my father's land grant. We had never sold the underlying fee simple under those easements, just a patchwork of rights-of-way that didn't reach as far as Brent thought they did. The phone clicked. Brent leaned back, pleased with himself. Police are on their way, Miss Collins. For everyone's safety. I slid the plat to the edge of his desk so his eyes had to land on it. For everyone's safety, I said quietly, Start reading. His smirk faltered only a fraction, but I saw it. What am I looking at? My father's deed chain, I said. What your board keeps pretending doesn't exist. The land under your architectural integrity is mine. You can regulate a mailbox color on a lot if your bylaws say so, Brent, but you don't foreclose the dirt the mailbox stands on. Not without meeting a threshold you've never met. He went pink, then gray. You're misunderstanding, I'm not, I said, and I won't be paying your fine. That would have been good theater if I'd just walked out, but I went one step farther. I snapped a photo of the page with my phone, tucked the binder back where it was, and left without another word. Outside, the wind had changed. The ridgeline looked closer. I called the only lawyer I trust for bad weather, Amir Patel, a property guy who's allergic to fluff, and said I think the ground under the HOA is mine. Amir drove out that afternoon with a portable scanner, 2 legal pads, and a patience that reminded me of my father when a fence post wouldn't sit straight. We spent hours at my kitchen table, elbows planted exactly where Dad used to put them, rolling back through deeds like a film in reverse. The homestead patent, the easements, the developer's conditional plats, the covenants, some recorded properly, some not. By midnight, Amir looked up and said, "They've built power on paper scaffolding, and they've cut corners to keep the scaffolding from being inspected." "What's our play?" I asked. "Injunction first," he said. "Stop the fine collections and foreclosure threats. Then discovery. If they've been amending bylaws without quorum or misusing funds, it's game over." It's funny, courage doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like rolling up your sleeves. I started knocking on doors the next day. People had stories the way old barns have nails everywhere buried waiting. A widow fined because her grandkids' bicycles were visible from the street. A veteran cited for a flagpole exceeding aesthetic height. A single mom threatened with a lien because she planted vegetables in a front bed. Some folks were afraid to talk. Some cried. The more they spoke, the angrier I got, then the calmer. The leak came 3 days later from a throwaway email account board, minutes that never made it to the official record, side notes about Target owners like me, who lower perceived value, a spreadsheet with dues adjustments for the board's friends. There were also payments to a consultant who turned out to be Brent's brother-in-law. Amir read until dawn and said softly, "They didn't just bend the rules. They built a private playground." We filed. The judge signed the temporary order halting collections with a pen that made a sound I'll never forget, like a click you feel in your ribs. The association's lawyer responded with a countersuit for defamation and interference with community governance. It was full of adjectives and very short on dates. Amir smiled the tired smile of a man who's seen this play before and said discovery will be clarifying. The hearing room was packed, neighbors, a couple of local reporters, the board in a tight row with tight smiles. Brent looked smaller under fluorescent light. Amir walked the judge through maps on an easel, the plat overlays, the missing votes, the fines invented by policy memorandum instead of amendment. Then he called Lila, an assistant secretary who had quietly slipped us the leak. Lila's voice shook, then strengthened. "They would decide things by email chain," she said. "We never had quorum in those meetings labeled special. We were told to backdate sign-in sheets." She stared at Brent when she said it. When I objected, I was told to remember who protects my property value. When it was Brent's turn, he tried to go big community standards. Property values, the duty to protect investments, but Amir kept him at the small things. "Show us the dated vote, adopting the unsightly standard. Used to fine Miss Collins," Amir said gently. Brent shuffled papers. "Show us the ledger entry for the consultant payments." More shuffling. "Show us where the easement grants under the roads and parks transfer underlying fee title to the association." Silence. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Halverson, are you telling this court the board collected and threatened fines under rules that were never properly adopted?" Brent cleared his throat. "We operated according to prevailing practice, which is not the law," the judge said. The order came the following week. Fines voided, enforcement enjoined, the association placed under a court-appointed receiver pending full audit. The court referred the financial irregularities to the county. The part that made me sit down was the line stating that any remaining governance must be exercised within the narrow bounds of recorded, validly adopted covenants and easements. In plain language, the ground is not yours to bully. It didn't end Brent. People like him don't evaporate, they retrench. He sent a federal complaint accusing me of orchestrating a smear that destroyed community goodwill. I read it at my kitchen table with the same old plat under my elbow and laughed once, short and not very kind. Then I went back to work. A coalition of neighbors formed, D from the feed store, Mr. Washington from the end of Cottonwood Lane, a dozen others who had been too quiet for too long. We met in my barn most nights, sitting on hay bales like pews, hammering out what justice would look like once the dust settled. What we built didn't look like an HOA. We took the old office empty now, its glass less smug somehow, and turned it into a community hub with open books on a wall-length corkboard line items you could point to with a finger and follow to the penny. No dues without a vote. No fines. Voluntary committees for real things, cleanup days. Garden plots, a fund to help a neighbor repair a roof after a storm. Mr. Washington ran an entrepreneurship class for teenagers in the old conference room. Dee organized a seed exchange where the reception desk used to scold you. Brent showed up, once thinner eyes a little wild. He waited for me by the herb garden we planted where their flagstone planter had been. "You've ruined me," he said, flat as dust. "You did that by yourself," I said, not unkindly. "And you can still do one good thing." He blinked like he hadn't heard that word in a while. "What's that?" "Leave us alone." He left. Not far, men like him haunt the edges, but far enough. If you're waiting for a victory parade, it didn't come. What came was quieter and better. A Tuesday night with string lights over a table of baked beans and coleslaw kids weaving between chairs, a stack of paper plates that kept falling over. People told stories into the cool air, and I stood back near the doorway, hands in my back pockets, listening to the sound a neighborhood makes when it remembers itself. I've replayed that first morning more times than I'll admit the letter, the coffee, the way the room leaned. I thought the fight would be about my fence, my barn, my stubborn streak. Turns out it was about everybody else's voice and the way power looks when no one is watching. I didn't set out to be a symbol or an example. I set out to keep my father's elbows on that plat, to keep the wind singing down our ridgeline. But somewhere between the injunction and the ribbon we tied to the hub's front door, I learned that ownership isn't just a deed. It's a promise you make to the folks living on your map. So here's where I leave it with you. Should neighbors be able to vote on your mailbox color if they're fair about it, or does land trump everything? When community standards turn into a cudgel, where's the line between order and control? Tell me where you stand, what feels like justice, what feels like overreach, and what you'd do if the letter with the shiny seal landed on your counter tomorrow. Like, share and drop your story in the comments. I'll be reading every word.